Street checks by police have been the subject of ongoing controversy, such that the previous provincial government commissioned an investigation into the practice. The report from the Independent Street Checks Review came down on the final day of 2018, and it cast real doubt on the efficacy of the practice. Here to consider those findings and what Ontario's next steps should be, we welcome Jeff McGuire. He's Executive Director of the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police. Rob Jameson, President and CEO of the Ontario Provincial Police Association. Kika Ojo, Senior Advisor and Facilitator for the Ontario Street Checks Review and Principal Consultant at Kojo Institute and Equity Consultancy. Nia Singh, Principal Lawyer at Ma'at Legal Services in Toronto. And Akwasi Owusu Bempa, Assistant Professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. And we're delighted to welcome you all here to TVO tonight for this timely and important conversation. Before we go any further, let's just catch up on what Mr. Justice Tulloch had to say about this review that he did. Here's a clip of him doing his thing. Sheldon, if you would.
Through my research and consultations, I found that random carding had a very minimal role in detecting or deterring offenders or reducing crime. In my view, it is far better to use our limited resources to focus on individuals who are reasonably suspected of committing an offense, rather than using valuable manpower to question thousands of people not reasonably suspected of anything. The negative impact of random carding, particularly on Indigenous, Black, and other racialized communities, combined with the limited evidence that it is an effective police tool, brings me to only one logical conclusion, and that is that random carding should end.
Mr. Justice Michael Tulloch, okay, you had an official role with this thing, so let's start with you and get you just to help us out with some of the background here. Why was he tasked with looking into this in the first place?
I think one of the macro reasons is around the community's relationship with the police, and the previous government sort of tapping into multiple narratives from all sort of parts of our community, saying that the relationship between the community and the police is strained, and that some of the experiences were really troubling, and sort of wanted to kind of tap into that and sort of see what was happening. I think the second thing I would put on the table is just, around the regulation and whether the regulation was being, meted out or adhered to remotely similarly across the province.
Well, that was my next question. Is this a Toronto thing or an Ontario thing?
It's definitely an Ontario thing. So we traveled the province extensively, and Justice Tulloch speaks to how many people he consulted with personally, and I mean the number is quite significant. But what was interesting was that the stories were very consistent across the province.
Okay. Here is the way that the judge defined carding and street checks, which, just to make sure everybody's on the same page and our viewers know what we're talking about here. Carding, situations in which a police officer randomly asks an individual to provide identifying information when there is no objectively suspicious activity, the individual is not suspected of any offense, and there is no reason to believe that the individual has any information on any offense. That information is then recorded and stored in a police intelligence database. That's carding. Street checks involves identifying information obtained by a police officer concerning an individual outside of a police station that is not part of an investigation. Now, I guess I want to know, go ahead, let's go to you first. Does this clarify anything?
I think it certainly does. It assists the thought that the OACP has held for a long period of time.
The Chiefs of Police.
The Chiefs of Police are the association. There needed to be a distinction moving forward. And I think in the past, they were lumped together as carding and as street checks all as one thing. I think the distinction was absolutely essential. We have tremendous respect for Justice Tulloch. We worked with him through this process over the last number of years, and we're part of the stakeholder group. And I think by making this clarification, he also, in his report later, spoke to the value of proper and appropriate street checking in accordance with the Charter rights and for the right reasons and for public safety. There are those issues, so not to ban them altogether. If I could give a brief example on that matter, when I was the Chief of Police in Niagara Region just a couple of years ago, when the street check process broke and this whole information, we looked at our database and we had, I don't know the exact number, 50, 60,000 street checks in our street check RMS system. I think about 90% of those had nothing to do with the word street checks, nothing to do, not even anything to do with the word carding. We were using that, and many police services were using it as a bin to store different types of information. So the numerical value was way off. I think this helps to clarify it, and it also helps us be better able to educate police officers on the street the right way to do things for the right reasons and the things that they're not permitted to do.
Just curious on a follow-up here. What have you done with all that information that was in your system?
Well, that's another one of the things that's coming forward, and I know Justice Tulloch has spoken to that. I'm no longer with Niagara, so I can't speak specifically to them. I do know that that information from previous is locked down under the control of the Chief of Police in each jurisdiction according to the regulation that was passed by, or the initial regulation that came forward. Following up to that, I know that Justice Tulloch has made comment, and in the future we need to look at that and see where that goes. And we'll be working and seeing as we move forward and what the government does with that now.
Okay, Rob, I should get you to comment on this as well. Do you think the carding and street checks, the way they have been defined here, indicates that there's a clear difference between both?
Yes, absolutely. I actually think Justice Tulloch got it right, and we fully support that. We do not support, the OPP Association does not support anything that is arbitrary or random in its nature. And he's aptly pointed out that'll be little to no value in that as well. You know, I was taught at an early age never to take away someone's dignity. And when you listen to members of communities that come forward and they talk about their experiences, we have to listen. But at the same time, through the process, I was in those rooms a couple of years ago pushing very hard for the bifurcation of these two issues on behalf of our members in saying, listen, we need to get this right off the get-go. And I had pushed for, that sort of conversation, and I think it kind of happened backwards. But at the same time, I'm glad that we're finally having a conversation. Justice Tulloch brings credibility to the issue. And having been in the room at one of the community consultations and also a couple of Fridays ago and seeing the whole room there and various stakeholders, and it was a really interesting feeling that was in the room, like almost that these were positive first steps on the go forward. So he absolutely got it right, but we also feel that there is huge value in lawful street checks that provides intelligence to protect, to increase officer safety, to increase community safety, and to also protect the most vulnerable in our society, specifically in some of the things that we've pushed hard about with regards to human trafficking.
Nia, are you satisfied that there is a greater understanding now of the difference between carding and street checks?
I'm glad Justice Tulloch made the distinction, but I still think there's some confusion. Justice Tulloch, when he made his delivery on January 4th, he basically explained what an example of a street check was. And he said that if somebody was by a window and they had some tools or something to that extent where there was suspicion. So that's equated to investigative detention, which is a power police already have. I want to make sure that the public and the police don't conflate street checks thinking they can, again, stop people because they want to check them out, as opposed to having a legitimate investigative purpose. So I'm glad there's been a distinction, but I think we have to drop the term street checks and just focus on either investigative detention, which is legal and appropriate, or carding, which is illegal.
Akwasi, do you think there was this confusion or problem because the previous government didn't write the regulation well?
No, I think the confusion or problem is the fact that street checks had escalated to such a point that they were collecting a whole range of useless data about people some of whom were deemed suspicious, some of whom weren't, but they'd been so far removed from their original intent, which was to gather good intelligence, to simply a form of mass data collection, and that was what was happening. And I think officers, if asked about the carding of specific individuals, might have been able to say that those individuals looked suspicious. Why is that the case? Partly because of the people who they were carding, predominantly young male people of color, who are often viewed with suspicion. I do agree, and I'm happy that Justice Tulloch has drawn a distinction between what might be a legitimate intelligence gathering practice, and I think that would be more akin to what Nia has described. But for me, carding was simply a euphemistic term for street check, and the fact that the Niagara Police had a street check database that was full of carding information tells me that they're one and the same, but that the practice of intelligence gathering needs to be curtailed, drawn back, and align more with what Nia has described.
What do you think should happen with all that information that is in the, and let's not just pick on Niagara here. I mean, most police services have this kind of database.
That's a very good question. I think that there needs to be, as Justice Tulloch has recommended, strict control over, and we see this in part in the regulation, over how that information is used, what it's stored, and what for. I wouldn't want to erase it all, and certainly not moving forward, because we wouldn't know about the different forms of disparity and perhaps discrimination that we're now seeing in the data and talking about if it were all erased. But there certainly needs to be control over who has access to that, whether that's frontline officers, whether that's just for especially for more historic data, and not historic under the regulation, but older data, for the service itself to look back and see how officers are policing. But I think it should be retained, but there needs to be controls over who has access to the data and for what purposes.
Could I
Please.
clarify one point? I'm sorry, and I may have misspoke myself a little bit. When I spoke about the Niagara situation when I was the chief there were some 60,000. I didn't mean they were divided between street checks and carding. The vast majority, the 90% I spoke of, we were putting things in there that dealt with impounded vehicles, with warnings and HTA offenses and things such as that. So I just don't want the public to get the impression that there were 90% of that 60,000 were actually defined as carding, according to Justice Tulloch.
Gotcha.
That wasn't the case, and I think
Thanks for that clarification. Anybody watching this right now, Kika, who's from a so-called racialized community will understand the impact that street checks have on people. But not all of our viewers are from racialized communities, and they may not know. So can you help us understand what the impact has been?
I mean, it's vast. There's so much to say. I mean, when going across the province and hearing 14-year-olds talking about, going to school on their bicycles or walking with their bicycles and, being stopped by the police and questioned in a way that they knew was, from a source of suspicion when they were literally just going to school that morning, and sort of hearing that story over and over again. Just, I mean, I could go on in terms of the types of stories. And so every interaction with the police thereafter becomes one of fear, right? One of grave concern about how will this end? How will I fare? What do I need to do to be, sort of seen in a particular way, in a non-threatening way? How do I make myself less threatening? I mean, those are not. The average citizen should not have to worry and concern themselves with that. And I think, and that can lead to a number of social, but also psychosocial implications for individuals and for the community at large. And there are real implications. I remember speaking to a counselor many years ago, or a therapist, and she talked about a client that she had simply because of an interaction he had with one of our police services in Ontario. And this was a youth, like a high school student, a young person, a black male. So, we cannot underestimate the impact, the negative and harmful and long-standing impact on individuals and on the community as a whole.
Would you acknowledge it had that kind of impact?
Well, not being from the racialized groups, personally, I don't have that lived experience. I think that's something that, let's be candid. But at the same time, I think, we were given one mouth and two ears for a reason, and I think we need to listen when comments and concerns come forward. And with having said that, as a police officer myself and working with incredible people across this province in various capacities, and I made reference to this earlier, personally I've submitted hundreds of street checks on predominantly white men and outlaw motorcycle gangs and associates, which, listening to these concerns when we sat through the consultations from activists and community groups and so on and so forth, and people with lived experience. It was an interesting dialogue at our table when we started sharing those different experiences, and some of those folks hadn't necessarily thought about the impacts into organized crime. So when we talked earlier, you mentioned earlier about, is this a Toronto issue or is it an Ontario issue? It's an Ontario issue. And what happens in Toronto or what happens in the rest of the province cascades throughout the province. And to speak specifically on that, I don't have that lived experience, but folks that I think any interaction that a police officer has with the public can be, most folks don't have interactions with the police on a regular basis. You may get stopped for speeding 5 years ago, or you may have to have an officer come to your house for a noise disturbance or a domestic dispute or something along these lines. So that interaction isn't a whole lot. If it was deemed by the person to be a negative interaction, whether that was real or perceived, or the officers were doing their jobs and they didn't like the outcome, that can have an effect when we go to deal with those same folks down the road. And we as police officers see that all the time. If there has been a perceived or real negative interaction in the past, when we go deal with them again or for the second time, even if it's years later, that negative interaction that they felt that they've had clearly bleeds into the next interaction that we have with them.
Do you, Nia, see any, obviously, one of the things I want to try to understand here today is whether each side of this debate understands the other side. You've clearly told me that you have some understanding, having been in a room with a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders, that you do get what the other people were thinking. I want to ask you whether you see any value in street checks.
Investigative detention, yes.
You do.
If you see somebody who is suspicious of a criminal activity, you have every right as an officer or a citizen to go up and inquire. Mm-hmm. I see a very huge problem with somebody driving a car and an officer stopping that car and then asking the passenger for identification, or some youth walking down the street and then the officers pull over and say, hey, where are you going? Can I see some ID? It's the unexpected interruptions to your daily life. But when it's a police officer, no matter what race you are, you would always have a heightened sense of awareness because you know the power of police officers. For the African Canadian community and Indigenous communities, we have been on the receiving end of a lot of discrimination and physical, psychological, and emotional abuse. So when you have a practice this pervasive, continuing for such a long time, it has a detrimental effect.
You want to speak to that, I can
Well,
see.
yeah, I go back to human trafficking, and I said this very thing on behalf of the members that I represent when they were doing these regulations, and I said, don't shut down conversations, because to your point where you would have an issue with someone that's in a vehicle, I would say you've got a member of the Hells Angels within the vehicle, you've got someone else driving, you've got another person that's in the back. That's information that I want to know. I want to know who you are, because you're hanging out with members of organized crime. I want to know about the guy that's driving, the young Indigenous or non-Indigenous girl or woman that's in the back seat being trafficked up and down the 401 corridor, or in Northern Ontario where folks are coming into the more urban areas. I want to know who you are. And I want to know who you are because the next day when you are sexually assaulted or you are murdered, and wouldn't it be great to know, hey, yesterday this officer stopped that vehicle with these people in the vehicle, in that vehicle, on this date, time, location, and and give the officers, the detectives that are assigned to that case, an opportunity or a window to follow that up through intelligence-led policing.
Okay, let me
and
get
hopefully
Nia on
bring
this.
some
Is that
closure.
reasonable?
That's reasonable in that circumstance, but that's when you have a reasonable suspicion. You have an identified member of the Hells Angels through your investigative purposes, and then you are investigating a potential crime. When it's an innocent person just walking down the street, that is the issue, and that's what we would experience.
Professor.
And I think the point there is the specificity. Like what was happening and is the fact that people were being stopped without that level of intelligence or the suspicion there, other than where they were perhaps, what they looked like, their age, the clothes that they were wearing. And in terms of the impact, it is the repeated encounter. So you said someone might have an interaction with the police and they perceive that as negative, perhaps based on the outcome. Much of the research shows that it's not actually the outcome of a police encounter that dictates or determines how you feel about that encounter. It's how you're treated during that encounter. It's a matter of procedural justice. And we know, especially for young racialized people who are stopped, oftentimes that simply the fact that they're stopped repeatedly is taken as procedural injustice itself. It is those interruptions to their daily lives, the experience of being stopped by the police, being treated in a often relatively disrespectful manner over and over again, that leads to some of the outcomes that Kika talked about, right? So we know that individuals who experience perceived police injustice have a higher chance of having problems with mental health, having actually health-related problems related to stress. But we also know that they're much less likely to engage with the police in the future. They're less likely to cooperate with the authorities, to obey the law, to act as witnesses in court cases. So if we want to look at the impact that this has on communities, not only does it have an effect on personal well-being of individuals and those around them, but it also has an impact on community safety.
And the justice system all the way through, I guess. Kika, you wanted to say.
I just wanted to say that, I mean, one of the challenges I'm feeling or finding about all of this is that we're not talking about sort of the more macro issue around systemic racism. I shouldn't say we're not talking about that. I mean, I think it's all part of the conversation, but I've said this about many systems and many institutions. They've been built and designed as if systemic racism doesn't exist. And I think we're facing that yet again. So you have, the police with the sorts of powers that they have and sort of a narrative that says, systemic racism, what's that, right? Or this sort of collective ignoring or denial of that reality in our province.
Cops do hate hearing that. I think they are prepared to acknowledge that there are bad apples in every barrel.
Precisely.
But they hate being told that there is systemic racism throughout their institution.
And that right there will be the beginning. That is the beginning of resolution of this. And when I say resolution, I don't mean that they'll suddenly all go away. But if you want to talk about how the community feels about this, one of the major problems is this systemic denial of systemic racism.
But I presume, Jeff, that you deny the systemic racism because you don't think it's there.
Well, no, I disagree with you. I think all of the systems that have been spoken about, I think it's very clear. We've seen sufficient data. I'm a full-grown adult, and I see what goes on, and I've read much of the things, and I've got lived experiences as well from this side. And I would say that, of course, there's systemic racism in most of the issues throughout. But I would also like to say that I think we're working very hard at trying to fix those things, and we're trying to acknowledge, on behalf of the chiefs, we look at this, and police officers on the front line. I think there's a dramatic difference in the culture of policing now than there was 20 years ago. Some of the things that I can tell you about that were mentioned in the report, the performance standards for these street checks. I left the Toronto Police Service in 2012 as an acting deputy chief, and I'll throw myself on the sword here to tell you that 15 years ago, I was one of those unit commanders encouraging my officers to submit as many as possible of those checks as they could, and they were looked at in performance standards. They weren't the be all and end all, but there were. I guarantee you that officers were called in and say they were called 172s at the time. You have no 172s, or you've got two 172s. You worked 22 days yesterday. How can that be? And would encourage them to. I'll also stand here now today and tell you I recognize that that's not right. That's not correct. That's not the proper information that we were giving to the officers at the front line, or in fact, almost coercing them to do. And that's a bit of a strong term. But we recognize now that things like that, and I think you would find the chiefs across the province as well. Rob makes some great points as well. I also worked homicide in Toronto for 10 years. I have solved some cases in relation to cards, but I think realistically we need to look at, if we're talking about 1 or 2 or 100 cards out of 500,000 during that period of time, then we have to kind of pay attention to what Justice Tulloch has had to say and make sure we equip our officers to do the best they can to bring those relationships back, rebuild some more as best we can, and help to keep the public safe at the same time.
Let me do a follow-up question about the officers themselves because, and Sheldon, I'm on the bottom of page 3 here. Can you bring up this graphic? The Globe and Mail did a survey, and they discovered that more than 3/4 of uniformed police officers in the Toronto Police Service actually lived outside the 416. This is as of December 2018. And I guess, Neil, I'll start with you on this. I guess the argument is that you're going to be more connected to the neighborhoods that you police if you actually live in those neighborhoods. And if you want to writ large, if you live in Toronto, you're going to care more about policing Toronto better and making sure your relationships with those you police are better. The suggestion, I guess, in these numbers is that if 3/4 of the members of the police service are living outside the city, they don't have that connection. What's your view of that?
My view is people who are going to work for the Toronto Police Force should have had some time living in the city of Toronto. And I'll give you an analogy. We wouldn't hire Ottawa police officers, people born and raised in Ottawa, to go police in Montreal. Because there's a different culture, there's a different experience. When you get to officers...
It's not quite the same analogy, though, Nia. I mean, if you live in York Region and you're policing Toronto, I mean, that's not Ottawa and Montreal.
It's the only way I can show you, because if you don't grow up in Toronto, you're not exposed to the huge multicultural diversity that we experience every day. You're growing up in Barrie or Sudbury or some rural area where there's less diversity. You learn all your perceptions about people of color through TV and media, which is usually negative. You come to the city of Toronto and then you start policing, and you're basing your relationships with those people based on what you see on TV or the negative stereotypes you hear. If you live in Toronto, you're exposed to different cultures, and you get to understand Jamaicans, West Indians, Chinese, South Asians. And then when you interact with them, it's not based on stereotypes, television, or any negative media. So living in Toronto would give officers a better understanding of who they're dealing with, what the culture is, and not have as much racial bias. I think there still will be racial bias, but there'll be definitely less if they're more exposed to those types
Living in Toronto now or at some point in their lives?
At some point in their life. I think to demand officers live currently in the city that they're policing may not be practical. But a couple years lived experience, or at least 3-4 years, the more the better, in my opinion.
Rob, what's your view?
I disagree, respectfully. I understand what you're saying, but in the OPP example, I can't speak to Toronto because, I'll let my colleague Mike McCormick do that, but specifically the OPP. So many of our members actually in Northern Ontario live and work in the communities that we police. Like, that's just the way it is. I don't think, and most of our police officers have post-secondary, and I do believe that education, and I say this all the time, especially in younger ages before folks get into a career such as policing, we're brought together in education with folks from all different walks of life and backgrounds, and you're in experiences, and then getting on the job. So I think we should be focusing on the best candidates.
Okay, let me get what your colleague has to say on this. Jeff, if you want to be a cop in Toronto, should you have to live in Toronto?
Well, yeah, no, I wanted to jump in. And first of all, I don't think you necessarily have to. I really don't. I mean, I spent 35 years here. I grew up in Etobicoke, but almost from the time I was hired back in the early 80s, I was living outside. And I think you'll find a lot of it is financially driven. It's the cost of living in Toronto. I have family members that policed in Toronto, and they don't live here. But as far as the racial bias in police officers, I would suggest to you that there is some. I mean, it's simple in my view. We all came from the human race. That's where we hire from. There's some racial bias buried in every single one of us. All of us here at the table have some racial bias somewhere. It's how we learn to deal with it and recognize it and act upon it. And I think we've worked hard to do that in policing. So it's not going to disappear completely. To have to live right here, I don't think, in my view, I mean, you know a lot of good cops. I know you do. I'm sure you people do. And I know you've got some friends, and there's some great cops. When we look at that, the picture that was on the board, and it says 3 out of 4 cops in Toronto live outside the city, I don't believe that all those great cops that you know just came out of that 1 in 4. I would venture to say that they're great cops that came from York Region, came from other. And I've done a lot of recruiting, a lot of hiring, and they come from other neighborhoods. Absolutely, you need to have some. I don't think you need to have all. And I don't think it's fair to ask the officers to say that you have to live here if you want to work
Well,
here.
they do it in Boston. If you want to work for the Boston Fire Department, you got to live in Boston. If you want to be a cop in Boston, you got to live in Boston. Should we do that here?
I mean, I don't think that it's the entire issue. So I mean, I think I'm not going to say that I'm absolutely against it or for it. I don't know that it matters that much in relation to the issues that we're discussing. So when we talk about systemic racism, for example, where people live, I mean, there are people in very diverse spaces can still be racist, and not just the people, but the systems. The policing system is not dependent upon whether, I think we have a great example here in Toronto where the very chief is racialized, is black. And we see major problems. And I'm not trying to paint a brush over the entire police service, Toronto Police Service, but just to say that representation is not the only issue. It's important, but it's not everything. I guess the only other thing I must say in relation to Jeff's comments about racial bias and it being sort of in all of us, I mean, that narrative alone is an indicator to me that the understanding about what systemic racism is lacking. And I say that with all due respect, and Jeff, is just to say that what's missing there is power. So what I think about white people or any other racial group is one thing, but what I'm able to do or what impact I'm able to have over their lives is the real issue when we talk about power. And when we also when we talk about power, we're talking about the legacies and the meanings attached to our bodies. So there is meaning attached to black bodies that is derived from slavery, that is derived from colonialism. That is not the case for white bodies. There are other opposite positive meanings attached to white bodies. So a white man is immediately sort of identified with being a hero, for example. A black male body is immediately identified with being a predator. Like that's not me saying that. That is a historical process that has happened. And when we ignore that, that's how we end up in this position. So it is about naming that. It is naming the power differential, not just because police officers have guns, but from a whole systemic perspective, there is a power differential that needs to be named when we talk about systemic racism.
Let me follow up on that. Professor, I want to talk about power. The most powerful cop in the capital city of the province of Ontario is a black man. Has that not made a difference?
So I think that's, has it made a difference? I would argue, no, it has not made a difference. There were two black deputy chiefs that were vying for the position. I think one was more policing oriented. I think the other one was more community oriented and perhaps more attuned to the issues.
Was Peter Slowly?
That was Peter Slowly,
Yes.
and he ultimately was not chosen for the position. Why was that? I would argue that a large part of that was the powers that be. The police association and the likes preferred the candidate that looked more like a company man, and that was Saunders, and Peter Slowly ultimately was not given the position. But at the end of the day, that is one individual at the top of an institution, right? But he doesn't supervise what every single officer is doing all day, every day. Might not be aware of all of the policies, all of the practices, all of the supervisory directives that are being given. And so to simply put a black body at the top of an institution and assume that that's going to change the dynamics of that institution or the whole society in which that institution operates is, to me, nonsensical.
Let me ask all right, go ahead.
And just to follow up, I think we also need to understand when we're talking here about systemic racism and we're talking about power differentials and the likes, we need to understand as well that the police are just one of a number of social institutions. They're at the back end of a long line of social institutions, and it's often problems to do with systemic racism, discrimination, and lack of opportunity in those other institutions and in our society more generally that the police are left to deal with.
I forget off the top of my head now, is it 5,000 or 6,000 officers on the Toronto Police Service, something like that?
5,000 uniformed, yeah.
5,000 roughly.
5,500 uniformed. Nia, if there were more black faces, male and female, in the makeup of the Toronto Police Service, would some of the issues we're talking about here today start to go away?
It would have to be a significant amount more in order for the culture to change, because right now it's police culture that dictates. So if you even look at police abuse, there are a lot of African Canadian officers who have abused their authority and done things that are wrong. So I don't think it's because of the color, it's more because of the culture and the power. So it would be a positive step, but I don't think it's enough.
What do you think?
Well, I can't speak to Toronto. I just don't
All right,
have.
how about on the OPP?
Well, specifically, you look at our recruits that come on, the men and women. We're still approximately 30% women in the OPP. More and more racialized minorities are getting on.
What percentage
the OPP.
would you say it is now?
I don't have the exact percentage, but it is still not where we would like to be. We would always like to reflect the communities that we police. But having said that, we have
The communities you police are, if I can put it this way, they are whiter than the 416.
Yeah, most communities are predominantly white. Certainly, as you get out of the city, Port Credit, Downsview, or Toronto Detachment, Port Credit, as I mentioned, you're sort of in the golden horseshoe. Yes, but as you get more north, our relationships are certainly significant with Indigenous people and communities as well. And many of our officers, myself included, have worked in many Indigenous communities, providing policing services to those folks. And officers get up there. It's interesting when you see a recruit come out of the academy, and maybe they grew up in Toronto, and next thing you know, they're posted to Cochrane, Ontario. And they get up there and they're like, I don't know what I'm going to get myself into here. And you know what? As soon as they get up there, they give the community a chance, and the community gives that officer a chance. We see some incredible things. We see people that had no intentions of leaving Northern Ontario, staying up in Northern Ontario because it's an amazing spot. So I think once there's that reciprocal, once you get to know your community and your community gets to know you, and we always say to our officers, you may get to know a lot of people within the community, but everybody will know who you are because they will know you by name. And these things are really critical with relationships. So I really think people being who they are, once you're in an environment, once you give that environment a chance, once they give you a chance, I think anything's possible.
Right,
and I represent some incredible officers.
You're going to forgive me, guys. We're down to our last minute here, so I want to come full circle. Let's go back to you. In our last minute, Mr. Justice Tulloch's recommendations are out. How hopeful are you that they're going to make a difference?
I mean, I think they make a difference because it's something for us to turn to. And, I think people trust Justice Tulloch, and as my colleagues here have said, there's a lot of integrity there and presumed, and I think it's due. And so we now have something that we can collectively, those of us that want to work on this and make change, have something that we can work on together. One of the things that before you move on that he has said, that he's talked about, is accountability. And we talk about representation, we talk about relationships, as my friend Rob has talked about here, but we don't talk enough about accountability. So what accountability measures will it take for this sort of social change to take place? That's what we need to put our heads together about. And it needs to be more than slaps on the wrist. If you read a lot of the newspaper articles that have come out around this subject, and since Justice Tulloch's report, they're talking about the sort of light and flaky accountability measures, the slaps on the wrist. It's actually quite embarrassing and problematic, and we need to be looking at that. When things are breached, when there is a breach in process or in the law or whatever, at the hands of a police officer, there should be real, significant consequences, because that will send a message, and that's something that chiefs of police do have power over.
I got to buy another 30 seconds just to let you respond to that.
Thanks very much. No, I thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I want to be very clear. The Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, like all of us, have no support for arbitrary detention in the carding manner whatsoever, collecting information from people. In regards to reflecting the community, I can tell you that we work with the Ministry of Community Safety and we run the Constable Selection System program. It's under review now. We work very hard, and every service across this province has worked very hard to try and reflect the community better.
But on her point, no more slaps to the wrist?
Easy. Absolutely. I think accountability is key. We approach accountability. I think it's important that if this is going to be successful, then there has to be some accountability, and we have to have the proper process. The government has to implement the regulations as they see fit, and we'll see where that goes, and we'll do what we can to.
Okay. Mr. Director, nice big wide shot. As I say, thank you to everybody for coming into TVO tonight for a really powerful discussion. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.